This is the Mulligan Stew podcast. Normally, the interviews are about, our conversations about, our guests are from the world of music and film. This time it's from our other show, Tasting Room Radio. I'm Terry David Mulligan. There are some guests we have come back because A, we like them, B, they're busy and there's lots to talk about, and C, they're just consistently there, available because they're right in front of you. For example, Luke Whittall, I'm going to pronounce it correctly because I'm going to mess it up as we go. Luke Whittall has released the Sipster's Pocket Guide to 50 more must-try BC wines. This is Volume 3, as it says right on the front. All new wines. The one thing we had to do, besides just talk about the book and the wines, was talk about the state of BC wines, the lost vintages. The wines are going to be crafted in Washington and Oregon and Ontario and brought back to British Columbia to help pay the bills for the next couple of years while those vines have a chance to recover. Then we start in on these pages. What I like about his writing, besides the humor and getting the wines bang on target, he steers clear of vintages, of winemakers, of growing seasons, of any sort of talk of what it smells and tastes like. He finds the other story that nobody else is writing about. I mean, everything that goes into them in the terroir. Heat domes, atmospheric rivers, deep freezes, smoke taint, it's all there. But he gets to the wine. That's what you want to know. Each wine mentioned is only a page and a half. By the way, I will mention that I have a vested interest in this book, although I've done 1 and 2, is that on page 121 is Winemaker's Cut Q&A, a wine I had a small part in creating and bringing to life, along with Jason Priestley and the winemaker, Michael Mosney, page 121. And he liked it. Luke finishes his page on Winemaker's Cut by saying, "Can the elements live happily ever after for at least a few more years until you open another bottle? Each time this drama is staged, the answer may be different. What will remain the same is that once the bottle is empty, everyone will take a bow. Yes, we will." Luke has also done 2 books now on Pocket Guide for 50 more must-try Ontario wines. Volume 2 comes out at the end of November, just in time for Christmas. Let's welcome back Luke Whittall. I'm Terry David Mulligan. This is Tasting Room Radio. You have heard me say this line before, and I'll say it again. I hold in my hand the Sipster's Pocket Guide to 50 more must-try BC wines, Volume 3. And Luke Whittall has come back and joined us here on Tasting Room Radio. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. How's the Okanagan? There are wineries for sale. There are wineries saying they can't hang on. There's wineries coming back with Washington wines. There's all sorts of dialogue going on about the state of the grape in the Okanagan. Do you have those same concerns?
Well, I live here, yeah. So it's the only constant in this industry is change, and we're going through a big period of change in the Okanagan and in the interior for the most part too. It doesn't really affect the coast, of course, but everyone's kind of dealing with it in their own way, and seeing some of the wineries, unfortunately, that I included in my Sipster's Pocket Guide Volume 3, that have decided, they're going to close up shop. They're just giving it up, and the properties are going to be for sale at some point, I'm sure. And that's kind of sad. I find that really sad because a lot of the appeal to me of British Columbia's wine is that diversity, and it's just it kind of in some ways marks a bit of a close of a really fun era in British Columbia wine when it was really experimental and really everyone was pretty positive about things. I think it's just a little bit negative now, and that'll pass. It's I don't want to say it's farming because that's such a cliche now, but really it does change with the seasons, and it does change with the cycle of the weather and the climates and the years and the vintages and everything. And this is just one of those kind of bleak times at the moment.
I kind of wonder, Luke, if who can adjust quicker to the situation, the small farmer or the big conglomerate?
Yeah, that's a good question. The small farmer doesn't have the funds to be able to adapt really quickly, but they have the ability to. And then the the large wineries have the funds to do it, but not necessarily the ability as easily to kind of change, because it's a big deal to change suddenly you're not growing Syrah anymore, for example, or to change your whole portfolio or part of it is a really big thing. For small wineries, they can do that, but again, it's the funding. So
Sure.
it's going to be a really interesting next couple of years, and I think it's going to be I think we'll see some really interesting, innovative things happening.
Nice. Yes, exactly that.
And I think it's going to cause us to really get creative. And the one thing about creative people, because I know you've met a ton of them, is that if you put restrictions on them, suddenly they're forced to be more creative. And sometimes people come up with great stuff that way. And it's going to be interesting.
What's going to be interesting will be to watch you and see if you care to include some of those Washington, Oregon juice wineries releases over the next couple of years, because the blends are going to change completely. We will see blends we've never seen before in British Columbia. And would it make interesting reading in Sipster 4?
Yeah, I haven't quite figured out how to deal with that yet. I think I want to wait until I actually get to taste some of these wines.
Sure.
Part of me that's the real wine, person is like, well, I don't really want to buy a Bordeaux and have it made with Nebbiolo or Pinot Noir or something. So I want a Bordeaux to be a Bordeaux. Therefore, I want, in theory, BC wine to be from BC. So it's a little bit, I'm a little tentative with that at the moment. But I haven't tasted anything, and I think it would be I'm kind of excited to be able to taste some of that, some of the wines that are made from American grapes.
I think some of those new wines will sell themselves just on interest alone. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
And frankly, if it keeps the farm going, if it keeps the family in the wine business, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, me too. The thing that I really am kind of hopeful for is that we go back, that we don't get a dependency on these, on the American grapes, and that we don't sort of build up that, at least from the industry side, where it's like, well, our Merlot is never going to be as good as the Merlot that we had in 24.
Yeah.
I don't want that kind of retrospective kind of lull to happen. The other thing that I think is really going to be interesting is what will happen. What will consumers think? Will they buy into BC wine when it's back to being actually made from British Columbia grapes?
It's a very good point.
Who knows, right? We don't know what's going to happen there. So that it could be a good, benefit for the short term, but in the long term, how's that going to affect us?
It's going to be an interesting time, Luke. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, here's your life as I remember it. Luke Whittall, of course. We're talking about Sipster 3. We're also going to talk about the Ontario 2, if I'm not mistaken. In 2021, Sipster's Guide #1, the pocket guide to go to 50 must-try BC wines. 2021, you were just a baby then. And it was an experiment. It was just, you were saying, let's put it out and see what happens. And the response was phenomenal. So as a result, 2023 came Sipster 2. 2023 came Sipster 50 Must Try. 2024 Sipster 3. 2024 November 19, yet to be released. Sipster 50 more Must Try Ontario wines. That is Volume 2, is it not?
That's correct. Yes, Volume 2 is coming out.
Now, what were the differences in compiling those books and the writing and the gathering of resources between Ontario and British Columbia?
The gathering of resources was a little trickier from here because I live in British Columbia. There's some pretty big differences in the industries. There's a lot of wineries here, and some of them are very small. And I drive by them every day, like I'm actually immersed in it. In Ontario, the wineries are generally much larger, but there's few of them. And there's a lot of associated wineries, wineries that are all owned by the same company. And even the smallest wineries there are fairly large. They have different minimum requirements at the time and things like that. It was procuring wines was a little bit more challenging, but once it came down to tasting and writing about them, it was so much fun because it was just really, really fun to explore a very different styles. I'm always kind of comparing it in some ways to British Columbia wine, but really trying to give it its own fair shake. And there's some fantastic wines that are being made in Ontario. I could not believe how good the Sauvignon Blanc was. every Sauvignon Blanc I tasted, and they're so undervalued, or at least they maybe undervalue themselves, where I'm tasting a wine that I know, to me, in my brain, tastes like a $45 bottle of wine. And then I'm shocked that it's $18 or $20. Like, it's unbelievable, some of those things. Peninsula Ridge was one of those where I tasted their top end Sauvignon Blanc, and it was $23. I'm like, this is ridiculous. There's no way this wine should be that good for that price. But maybe I'm used to British Columbia wine prices, which could be part of it as well.
Yes,
but the quality is fantastic, and Cabernet Franc, that just blew my mind. It was amazing.
But they don't have a Cab Franc festival. They don't have a Sauv Blanc festival. They have a Chardonnay festival, and is very popular and doing exceptionally well.
Mm-hmm. And Chardonnay does really beautiful things there too. I think that's actually one of the grapes that is fun to compare the two regions, to compare Ontario and British Columbia, because we make fantastic Chardonnay here too, and they do as well. Same with Pinot Noir, and Cab Franc, I think, is a really good, Canadian comparison grape to kind of see what the differences are between the regions.
Did you get a chance to talk to Charlie Pilliteri?
I didn't. Years ago, I actually met Gary.
Okay.
I met Gary Pilliteri years ago in the wine store where I was working, and he gave me his card, and because people would come up to me, and I could usually spot people who are in the industry, and because they ask different questions and things like that. And he came up, and he doesn't tell me who he is, and he's like, "What do you think of Ontario wines?" Keep in mind, I'm in a wine store that only sells British Columbia wines, so nobody's going to ask that unless they're in the they have some kind of interest in it. And I told him what I thought at the time, and then I really was a youngling in the industry. I was, I was a lot younger now. And he smiled. He seemed to like my answer, and he gave me his card. And he's like, "Well, next time you're in Ontario, I'll give you a tour." I lost the card, unfortunately, so I never got to take him up on that. But,
so but
I did go there, though.
It was Charlie that I asked, one of the last questions I asked when I was in Niagara, said, why can we not get together with Ontario and BC wines? Why don't I see more BC wines in Ontario and Ontario wines in BC? He said, because you guys are homers. You buy and sell everything that you make, and there's no room for us, and there's no way that you're going to appreciate Ontario wines in British Columbia. And that was that was quite a while ago.
It's true, and there's, we don't know this being in British Columbia, but I've been to wine shops in Nova Scotia and Quebec and Ontario, and the industry in all those places. And when they hear that I'm from British Columbia and that I live in wine country and work in the industry here, they are so enamored with British Columbia. British Columbia wines have a hugely popular reputation, far exceeding any other. Like, if you were to go to any other province and say which is the province that makes the best wine, I would bet dollars to donuts it would be automatically the first response would be British Columbia. We just have that reputation, and I think that's something that we need to at least be aware of, if not sort of be careful of. We want to make sure that the wines here are remain in that same league. Well, but it's interesting to hear that coming back, reflected back. It's fun.
Very nice. I appreciate that very much, and thanks for sharing. And it really does make me even sadder to realize that we can't taste Ontario and BC, and for the most part, BC can't be found in Ontario. You can find the big guys, but not the little guys that we like so much. So,
that's right.
So maybe maybe things will change along the way. Actually, I hear that there's some Ontario juice coming to BC bottles. That, like, some of the people with great connections in Ontario went looking for their replacement juice in Ontario and not Washington State. We'll see how that works out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know anyone who's doing. I haven't heard anyone who's doing using Ontario grapes or juice. but that's something that I thought would have been really, really interesting to see how that would happen. Of course, the long distance would probably make it a little bit more challenging, of course. But yeah, that was going to be interesting.
He is Luke Whittall, and he is the author of Volume 3 of the Sipster's Pocket Guide to 50 More Must-Try BC Wines, which is exactly what we're going to do. This is Tasting Room Radio. Terry David Mulligan. Our guest is Luke Whittall, and the book I hold is Volume 3, All New Wines of the Sipster's Pocket Guide to 50 More Must-Try BC Wines. Congratulations, first of all, on the success of these books.
Thank you.
I know when you started, and I think you actually told me in a previous interview, that it was as much for you as us. You had this knowledge, you had this idea for a book, and it took a while to take shape and what it would be and what it wouldn't be. But I do like the do's and don'ts of your writing and observing for the books, all of the books. And that is what you will talk about and what you won't talk about. So let's talk about just two or three things that you won't be finding in these books.
You won't be finding any information about the oak program of a wine, or when it was harvested, or the brix levels, or the TA or RS or anything like that. Actually, that's not true. The RS, I don't mention the RS, but I do say if the wine is, sweet or dry or whatever, because I think that's important. But for the most part, I stay away from the winey stats, as I call them, where they're just, it's information that I think is interesting, and I think it's interesting to people who are in the industry, and certainly there are some professions like chefs, for instance. Restaurants need to know these statistics and things,
yep.
But I'm not writing them for chefs. I'm not writing them for that. I'm writing it for people to enjoy, and to enjoy as much as the wines made me feel. So I really just want to sort of pass that same feeling on in writing form. It's really all I want to do is just write about the feeling that I'm getting from the wine. And that's wines that inspire me are the ones that are the easiest to write about.
There seems to be a lot of those kind of folks out there.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. And it's a fun book to write, and I'd like to keep writing more of them. Sure.
Did you write the Ontario book for us or Ontario?
I wrote it for Ontario. My parents live in Ontario. My family lives there now, although I'm not from there. I just really wanted to explore the wine industry there, and that became my excuse. People were asking, well, how about you do a Washington one, which is entirely possible as well too. It was really just my excuse to kind of explore a new wine region, because I thought if this works for British Columbia, surely it's going to work for other regions as well. Were
you committed to write a volume 2 if volume 1 didn't quite reach your expectations?
For Ontario?
Yeah.
I wanted to do that. The publisher wanted it as well, and so they offered me a contract pretty quickly for all of those. I actually wrote 2 books a year, so I had revolving deadlines. So January 1st was my deadline for the British Columbia one, and July 1st was my deadline for the Ontario one, and that I did that for 2 years.
Do you still hold down your day? Do you still hold down your day job?
Well, these books are not long, and they're not actually that difficult for me to write. And then a lot of it's at dinner time, really. Right. I'll have dinner, and my family knows that, Daddy just pulls out the laptop every now and then and starts writing in the middle of dinner. And so that's what happened.
All right. In 2021, when you did Sipster 1, if I had said to you, I don't see anything on canned sparkling wines in the book here, and like Lakeside and on Mayhem, and one, as a matter of fact, one that's not even doesn't even have alcohol. If we'd had that conversation in 2021, would you thought of us crazy? Were you thinking that way?
That there would be cans and things like that in the book?
And can not only by that, but no alcohol, low alcohol.
Oh,
cans.
No alcohol. The no alcohol one, I actually learned about that as I was editing the first book, and I was really actually disappointed that I couldn't put it in there. It was one of these things that I think is just really interesting, that there's, we're being creative, we're exploring new things. And if it's one thing that Sipsters really like, it's that exploration. What is it we are going to be doing? What is the industry doing now? What's the next, not the next big thing, because I don't like fashions or fads or anything like that, but I think it's really the innovations that I wanted to kind of explore a little bit. And that's where the cans came from, because that obviously was really starting to take off around that time. And suddenly more wines were in cans, and not just sparkling, but red and white and rosés and things like that. And I knew it was going to be a little bit bigger just because the format was really, appealing. It's great for BC lifestyle. It's kind of, I don't know that it's taken off quite so much in Ontario, but certainly for BC with all the hiking and backpacking and stuff like that. I mean, it really makes sense here. It really, really does.
Well,
so it seemed obvious.
Luke, here's the weird thing. In and around us in the Cowichan Valley, if you ask for canned wines, they have or anything of that ilk, you're just not going to find it. They just don't understand what you're talking about. And one of the best canned wines that I have tasted was the one Graham made at Ruby Blue. He's made an incredible kind of sparkly rosé that's fantastic in can.
Yeah, there's some fantastic stuff, and what I find really interesting is that they're not doing the same. Like, it's not the same wine in a different package.
Yep.
They're actually making unique wines for these, special for the canned market, and I think it's great.
Did any of the piquettes get considered?
Piquettes, I had the one piquette in the second volume,
okay,
which was from Benjamin Bridge. Actually, I kind of broke my own rule of not having a made in BC wine for that one, but it was a piquette, and it was 0 alcohol, and it was in a can, so it kind of ticked off 3 boxes. And it was available in British Columbia, and I found it here. So I was like, "Wow, it's available here, so I should try it." And it was really good. It had the wine thing where if you're tasting orange juice, it's going to smell and taste like orange juice. If you're tasting cranberry juice, same thing, right? But if you're tasting wine, it's supposed to smell and taste like a lot of different things. And this one checked that box. It was complex aromatically. It had lots of different flavors. There was 0 booze. It wasn't super huge flavor, but it was delightful, and that's why I included it. And I resisted it, actually. I actually kept it out for the first draft or something. So it was I had to convince myself that it was actually okay to put it in for that reason, because it was so fantastic.
And Luke, congratulations on the Pamplemousse de Sumac Piquette.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's carefree as you describe it. But, I mean, even in the packaging, I love the fact that it's in this tall bubble bottle. But I believe in what they make. Anything they're making, I'm going to be interested in.
Yeah, Jordan and Tyler are just knocking it out of the park with that. And I ran into Jordan. She was selling that at the farmer's market in Penticton. And I had no idea that was going on. It was frankly just brand new at the time. And it was one of those just amazing discoveries, and you do these every now and then. You find these these wines in the wild, and that was exactly what that was. It was cool.
I don't know if you've been in a wine store lately and have heard the conversation about the color of the rosé, usually by pairs of ladies if they're shopping together for their wines, and they talk about, well, what color do you like? And the really smart wine shops backlight them. In other words, put them up against the window so you can see the colors.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
And there are some winemakers who absolutely refuse to say they're making a specific color. No, it is what it is. That's what I get. However, the really smart ones, they know what colors we like. They really do. Not Tavel colored, which is dark and food friendly, but I'm thinking like Orofino's Cab Franc Rosé. First of all, it's Cab Franc. It's Rosé from Cab Franc. It's fantastic, and it's John Weber.
Yep. Big fan of that wine. Love it. Love. It's John Schreiner and I have that rosé conversation every now and then, where, for him a rosé means something a little different than what's happening, I think, trend wise. And he kind of he tells me, he's like, rosés are getting so dark now. Why is that? And I'm like, well, it's just the style, and that kind of thing. And so and I personally, I don't have a preference for a style of rosé. I think there's benefits to both, like a really dark and full kind of style of rosé, or the light Provençal, herbal and everything like that. I love them all, and I think it's a really good a good demonstration that you can actually make a very similar. You can take the same raw ingredients, the grapes, and do something completely different with them. Like Claude Soleil used to have a Cab Franc rosé, and it was way darker than the
Way
Pinot
dark,
Pinot one,
way
and it
darker.
was different style and everything, but it was fantastic as well. So just different strokes.
Hey, look, Meg and I have a conversation once a week about why people that we admire, winemakers that we admire, take a rosé, for example, or a brilliant bubble, and put it in a dark bottle.
Yeah,
Why is that?
I don't know. I suspect it's probably a cost of glass issue. If it's, or is it small wineries that are doing that? I'm not sure, but I really like the clear flint bottles personally, just so that you can see the
I
color. I
want to
think
see
that's
it.
what sells the rosé. Yeah,
Exactly that.
yeah,
All right, this is going to be a whole hour with you and I because I've got other questions for you. If you have time, you ready? Okay.
absolutely.
All right, Tasting Room Radio, Terry David Mulligan. When we last left Luke Whittall, he had written Sipsters 1 and 2 for BC, and then 1 and 2 for Ontario, although Ontario is coming out shortly. I lie. But I left my book open with my thumb up the spine on Alderley Vineyards Pinot Noir. Now, I know these guys, and they're next door neighbors right around there when we have meals together. And they took over. It was a perfect buy. They took over Roger Dorsman's Pinot Noir grapes that I believe were the first Pinot Noir planted in BC and perhaps in Canada. I'm not quite sure, but those vines have been in the ground 20 plus years. So when you start there, you're kind of ahead of the game already, as long as you know what to do with those vines, and they've done very, very well. And you highlight with their Pinot Noir.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a beautiful, beautiful Pinot Noir experience, and I've had a couple of vintages of that. Unfortunately, I've never been able to visit them, and it's something that I need to get to the island again to go and visit, because Zach and Julie were on my podcast, on the Sipsters Wine podcast. I had them on as guests, and we hit it off. And I learned later that he plays guitar and rides a motorcycle, and I do both of those things as well. So I'm like, wow, we got to get together and talk about guitars and motorcycles and stuff. And so in addition to unbelievable wines, and I think it really comes down to the attention to detail for the wines that I've tasted from Alderley. And it's just fun to see someone who's just so passionate about it, really taking over from a place. I spoke with Roger actually years ago, the former owner of Alderley. I actually spoke with him before he sold for my first book about the history of the wine industry in British Columbia, called Valleys of Wine. And he was really quite a very, he's kind of soft-spoken, but he was really quite analytical about everything that he'd done. He'd made all these decisions for particular reasons and things like that. And I'm seeing that that's continuing. And so it's a really, really great to see a winery transition from one ownership to another and still maintain that same kind of philosophy, because that doesn't always happen. That's very lucky. I've seen a lot of wineries happen where it changes hands and then it just goes downhill after that. So it's nice to see that it's continued.
Okay, Luke, there's two more reds I want to ask you about, and then I want to go back to the BC Whites. I made some notes here I'm dying to use. Okay. Fairview Cellars, the Bear. One of my favorite wine, because I loved Bill Eggert's Fairview Cellars wines. He's moved on, and he's a dangerous person if he's not kept busy. But I love Fairview Cellars. I love sending people there. If you like red wine, here you go. Yeah. And the Bear is very special because my brother Dennis was nicknamed the Bear for most of his life, and he ended up in Lahaina, Maui, and never came back. And he passed away just before the Lahaina fire, literally 3-4 weeks. And I had sent a bottle of the Bear to the Lahaina Yacht Club, which is just a bar on the main drag, but a very popular bar. It's gone now. I don't know if his friends ever got to open that bottle and toast him at the bar where he spent all of his life. But that's what I sent. I sent the Bear from Fairview Cellars, and I'm glad it's in your book.
Yeah, that's a fantastic wine. And knowing the kind of I don't want to say kismet, but the kind of I'm trying to think of the word now, what to say. Sometimes the serendipity basically of Bill's wines, things always usually happen at the right time, and so it kind of feels like they did, and that they did get that wine in time and were able to toast them. It just seems like it would be a great story for Bill to know as well too, which is great. I did a whole a vertical of the Bear's Meritage, which used to be called the Bear's Meritage. Now it's just called the Bear.
Yeah.
But I was lucky enough to be at a party that had 13 vintages in a row of this wine. And going back to the oldest, I think this would have been in 2019 or 20. And this is pre-COVID that we did this. And the earliest vintage was 2000.
Wow.
So we were tasting a 19-year-old version of it. And I can't remember which one. I've done a lot of verticals, and I love doing verticals. And I usually remember which ones are the standout ones. But I don't remember the standouts because I think it was just too difficult to choose because they were all fantastic. They were all, they showed their differences and things like that. But the Bear is seriously one of the top Grand Cru wines of British Columbia. And I've told Bill that, and I've mentioned it in blog posts and podcasts. It really, really is on par. It's our Chateau Lafite or Chateau Aubryon or whatever.
Well,
it is on that level.
Well, I'm gonna go directly to. I wasn't going to do it, but because of what you're saying about the Bear, I decided to flip the page to Nickel Vineyards Syrah Old Vines. And as you know, as you well know, most wine fans know that the first Syrah plantings in Canada happened at Nickel Vineyard. And so when you talk old, how old are we talking?
For Nickel, oh geez, when did Alex plant those? The 80s, I think.
Yep.
He was really, he wrote a book on the history of the wine industry in BC, as I did, but he did it in 1982. And I think in his research, he kind of enjoyed, Syrah, and he learned that maybe there's these places that could actually grow it. And so, that was the instigator for him. It is a beautiful property. I've been to that property a few times, and the interesting thing about it is that it's backed by a really high, stone ridge right behind them, and that just collects heat and radiates it all night and everything like that. I don't know if this is what for sure or not, but I don't know that the Syrah actually did well over the last winter. So I'm really hoping to see. I would really love to see a 24 Syrah from them, just to make sure, just to know that everything was okay from that. But that's the one vineyard I'm really concerned about. I haven't heard much about it since. So
I did hear today that it's for sale.
Nickel.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I'm hoping. I've heard wrong. I really am. I'm hoping that.
Yeah, me too.
One more from the Reds, it's I can't wait to get to it. Winemaker's Cut, the Winemaker's Cut Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
It's the jazz hands at the end of a performance. Razzle dazzle is your descriptor, and I first of all, I thumbs up from me for giving none of the background on this wine, just the wine itself. Pay attention to it. What will remain the same is that once the bottle is empty, everyone will take a bow. Thank you for this.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was so much fun to taste that wine. I remember that. And it was just such a riot. And there are wines that are, you taste them and you're like, oh, this is really serious. And this is really, really, like I have to focus on this wine. And it's like, you're almost in class. And not only that you're in class, but you were late getting there, and the teacher's staring at you, and things like that. And so some of these wines kind of do that. And sometimes you want wines that you want to learn from, and that you want to do that. And with this wine, it really had that kind of razzle dazzle. As I said, it didn't make you guilty for being late. It was just happy that you were there, and it was a lot of fun. And that was I kept seeing, these like Roquette, kick lines and stuff like that. Like it just had that kind of vibe to it, and I loved it.
Well, by the way, the white, the Marsanne Roussanne Viognier, is even better.
Yeah,
it's even better.
You told me that. I know, and you mentioned that, and You mentioned that when I was editing the book, and when I was in the editing stage, and I'm like, well, why couldn't I put that
Oh
into
my goodness! Oh, it is phenomenal. I hope somebody posts it for you, if not me.
Yeah. Oh my God.
I'm Terry David Mulligan. This is Tasting Room Radio. Luke Whittall is the author of all the Sipster books. It's the Sipster 3, the pocket guide to the top 50 must-try BC wines. He's already started another series on Ontario. Number 2 is coming up at the end of November. Covers sparkling, white, rosé, red, and dessert. None of those tasting notes that you have come to not like Forest Floor and Saddle and Barnyard, whatever. Not even a Robert Parker. Well, that's not true. He'll give you 1 glass for a very affordable wine and 5 for top end, like that. That's one of the small hints there. So volume 3, I want to ask you, if I can, Luke, about just some of the wines that stood out for me. Observatory Gruner Veltliner. He said the attitude was "come hither," which I love. And there's now an Italian wine, or Italian named wine, out of Hillside, a Merlot, that also is Italian for "come hither." So they happen in the same week. The thing with Gruner Veltliner, as much as we love it, it's tough to say, and it's a tougher sell for winemakers.
Yeah, it can be. And some winemakers, get to really be creative with a brand new grape variety. And in this case, it's Blair Gillingham who was taking this on, and he just made a fantastic wine out of this. And I've had it on a number of occasions at dinners and things like that. And I got to try tank samples. He was on my podcast as a guest as well, too. And it just delivers every time. It's fantastic. Gruner is something it's one of these experiment wines. We were talking earlier about wineries getting, and winemakers trying to be as creative as possible. And Gruner is really one of those grapes that kind of allows winemakers to kind of experiment a little bit. And in this case, it was such a fantastic wine. I was able to taste it as a tank sample. I was able to taste it when it was released. I actually was over for dinner at a restaurant in Penticton here, and it was on the list, so I thought it would be great with it. And this was months afterwards. It was still fantastic. Like, I was really, really proud that it was actually still aging well and tasting great, and it went with the food and everything like that. It was just a real bright spot in my tastings for that particular book, and just a lot of fun. I love wines that have a personality, and some wines, let's be frank, don't necessarily have to be fun to be enjoyed. You can actually have a wine that's a little bit more introverted or a little bit more restrained or things like that. But with this one, it just seemed it just had that lovely, I almost say tempting, but I must have thought of that at some point if I gave it the come hither kind of vibe to it. And it was fun. It was just such a tasty wine.
I'll tell you what else was fun, Luke, and we're going to have to click through here to finish this show, was Lake Breeze Pinot Gris, which because it's been there for years and because it's so well made, we take it for granted. Lake Breeze, and it's part of Lake. I think you said it's part of Lake Breeze's greatest hits. It pairs with fish tacos and classic rock, and you do make that because when you came into Vancouver, I think you were talking about Vancouver was a great classic rock station. I was probably part of that.
Yeah, so when I first moved to BC, there was a lot of classic rock going on. I didn't, because I moved here I'd lived in the Maritimes for a few years prior to that, and I just couldn't understand why we were listening to songs all the time from like 20, 30, 40 years ago. but now I understand it was really the, at the forefront of music at the time, which was that the quality of music has changed, and we can kind of get into that kind of thing for another whole podcast if you want to, or another whole hour. But really, with the Pinot Gris, I think I remember including it because it was a bit of a surprise for me. I've known that wine for years, and I've known their Pinot Blanc for years, and people were always sort of on side with one or the other. You either preferred the Pinot Blanc or you preferred the Pinot Gris. And sometimes it was husbands and wives, and the husbands would prefer one and the wives would prefer the other, but that's another story. Yep. Anyways, so for me, I was always on the Pinot Blanc side. And so I was at Lake Breeze for a tasting, and the Pinot Gris just spoke. It was so good, and and I don't know what it was that was different about that vintage, or maybe a change in me. I mean, I'm not the same, as I was 5 years ago when I was talking about the Pinot Blanc, so maybe that had something to do with it too. And it was fantastic, and I couldn't believe that I've been ignoring this wine for years, and that it was that good. It was amazing.
Okay, two more. I'm interested in anything happening in the Garnet Valley, and there's Chardonnays going on, and there's Pinot Noir going on in the Garnet Valley, just above Summerland. You call the Chardonnay electric, a lights-on Chardonnay, and I just I think it's the future of that valley, but I just kind of wonder if you're really reviewing the valley or the wine.
Yeah, hard to say. It's a really that now you're talking about the Garnet Valley Chardonnay, is that correct?
That's right.
Not the Solvero. Yeah. So Solvero's up there too, and they both have. It's just such exciting to be part of a new region, to see a new place kind of develop, and with Garnet Valley, it's just such a. It's just like watching something that is going to be great. And you're kind of like at a bar, and you're seeing a band that's way better than the bar that you're actually seeing them in. Like they're going to go on to good things, right?
Yeah.
There's no way that they're going to stay a secret for a long time, and that's what Garnet Valley is for me right now.
Exactly. Nice.
The Pinot Noir and the Chardonnay.
Nice.
I mean, it really is cool.
Nice metaphor. Excellent.
I love metaphors.
Something we can always identify with. Now, and so and then I take you to Four Shadows. Okay, they're dry Riesling. They make about 5 Rieslings actually, and the Shadows are their sons. They before they became winemakers. I find it ironic that one of your pairings is with a pork belly. They were pork farmers in Alberta.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they decided to give up that glamorous life. That's a tough life to become farmers on on the Naramata Bench, and they bought a piece of land that nobody was interested in. It was just an ugly piece of land, and they turned it into this incredible vineyard. And my hats off to them. Four Shadows.
Yeah, I remember that they do make a lot of Rieslings, and I remember it being really difficult to choose which one was I going to put in. It took me a while to kind of figure out, okay, well, this one, it came down to it, this one speaks to me more, and that's the one that made it in. But it was just a delightful amount of fun. It's a beautiful little wine shop too. It's a wonderful experience, and no wonder there's always cars in the parking lot when I drive by, because it's just such a wonderful place.
Well, that's it in a nutshell, Luke. I've got Volume 3 in my hand. It's out now, of course, and will be available for Christmas giving. As a matter of fact, Absolutely. It will fit beautifully in a stocking. Don't you think?
Perfect size.
Yeah.
Perfect size.
Now, the Ontario book's coming out shortly, right?
Yes, and a lot of people in BC have been asking me about it because they want to learn about Ontario, and that it's not necessarily going to show you lots about Ontario, although there is a little information at the beginning and the end about it.
Okay.
But basically, it is you can explore as well. It's all about enjoying reading about wine. Is really what it is.
Okay, Luke, listen, but this didn't all start, but it gave me impetus when I saw an article go by, or at least a long article type email that you had written called "A Winemaker is Not a God." Is that it? Was that the headline?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
What?
Winemakers are not gods.
That's right. What set that in motion?
I don't. I started that article months ago, and so that was on my Substack page, which is a subscriber newsletter that I do, and I remember I was listening to a wine podcast somewhere, and the way that the host was treating the winemaker who was the guest was really interesting, and it seemed like there was it fawning?
Was it fawning?
It was just kind of the host would say something about the Pinot Noir, or whatever, the wine Pinot or something like that, and they would say, oh, this is got a little bit of funk to it, and the winemaker would say, oh, that's not funk, it's something else. And then the host would kind of go, oh, yeah, of course, no, it's not. Of course, it wouldn't be that. And so, you know what I mean? Like there was this sort of it was like I don't want to say kowtowing, but it was basically, you know, the winemaker clearly knows the wines better than anyone, but do they know how it gets received by people? Like, do they know the kind of thing that we experience from it? And I think if there's a disconnect between their intention, you know, I mean, there has to be a disconnect between their intention and how we receive it, because they can't control what we, you know, how we think about a wine. So it's it's kind of a weird situation that I remember kind of feeling that when I was listening to this podcast, and I was like, oh, that's really weird. What other industry do we do where we honor, or we put so much, you know, weight to the person who made it? And I used, in that article, I used the example of a bread maker, basically. We don't do that. And I don't want to offend anyone with that. It was really just sort of me trying to be cheeky about stuff, and you know, maybe just say, hey, you know, let's think about this a little bit. You know, I'm going to enjoy wines that in a way that is completely different from what the winemaker intended, perhaps.
Well, it goes hand in glove with our wine business, of course. It's just part and parcel. But so is the books that you've given us, simply because you've changed the thought process about what wine is, our relationship to wine. Mm-hmm. Actually, there's a book coming, I think, from you, down the road, where you set aside your 50, and you're going to write the book about what's happened to our business, how has it changed, where is it going, and what the future looks like. And if it looks like it's darkness, then you're sort of feeling some of the dread that people are talking about and feeling, and in conversation over wine, about what happens to not just the BC wine business, but wine in general. If the next generation is not interested in wine, how do they survive, you know? Yeah, and that's the thing. I'm getting a bit of a sense that wine is not sort of the cool thing anymore, and we're maybe not necessarily responding to that yet. And I think we will, because, you know, cider is really strong right now. Beer is still beer. Yep. But spirits are coming up, and craft spirits especially. And so there's you know, the industry's in a bit of a flux, and then having so much news, you know, about how dire the last few winters have been in the Okanagan is not helping that, in my opinion. There's a lot of things where it's like you know, people will be touring the wine regions here, and they'll be like, oh, I thought all the vines were dead. And they just assume that we don't have any wine anymore, which is not true. There's still lots of wine from before. You know, the vines are going to be you know, they're going to be hurt and stuff like that. But now it's given people a reason to kind of look for other things, and there's other products out there now. It's not just wine anymore. So there's also a little bit of a change with the demographics. You know, my kids my son's going to be 20, and I poured him a nice wine. I made him a nice wine paired dinner when he turned 19. And he thought, man, this is interesting, Dad. But, you know, it wasn't his thing. It didn't captivate him like it did for other things. So it's going to be an interesting change as the generations change, you know. Thank you for this. I appreciate it very much.
You're welcome.
And carry on, as you will. Carry on. I've got to go look at that Substack again. And that life story, your life story, when it's done, I had said that Brad Pitt would be playing you, but I think I overreached. I think it has to be a Canadian to appreciate.
I'd be okay with Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah. And he knows his juice.
And he knows his juice. Yeah, and he knows BC.
And he knows BC. There you go. Here. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Good call. Thank you, Luke.
You're very welcome, Terry. Thank you so much.